in Israel, it's very, very hard to remember what happened 5 years ago, but 5 years ago, we were in the midst of major economic crisis in the world. On top of that, we had our own problems here in Israel with the Intifada, the uprising, the conflict with the Palestinians. And at that time, we had indeed a situation in which, to put in simple words, people didn't want to come to Israel, let alone doing business here. The economy was shrinking, government expenditures went out of control, and these are exactly the times that Israelis understand that something has to be done. I mean, there is a feeling always in Israel that you have to have the people to understand that we have a sense of crisis so as to get and address the issues and resolve the problems. And this is exactly a situation that we, the government, had at the time in 2003. Again, just to remind you, in 2003, we're talking about March of 2003, a new government was put in place. Very, very clear leadership, Prime Minister Sharon in charge of the foreign affairs of the country, and Mr. Netanyahu, who, much to the surprise of many people, was appointed finance minister, took responsibility for the economic affairs, and there was kind of a clear understanding between the two leaders about who should do what and how they get the support of each other. And with that, we went on, and again, I'm telling the stories so as to, for all of us to understand that sometimes we need a sense of crisis, all the times we need true leadership so as to advance changes in everything almost here in Israel. But in any case, in 2003, with this kind of a background, a new recovery plan was put on the table. There was nothing new in terms of economic theory in that policy, but I think that what was important is that things were said very, very clearly about what we wanted to do, what we intended to do, and how to do that. And again, the main principle was that indeed what we ought to do was to reduce the involvement of the government in the economy, provide the right incentives for the private sector to generate growth in the economy. There's nothing new in that, as I said. All previous governments in Israel, at least from 85 and on, after we went out of the inflationary period, had basically the same type of thinking, but the issue was the implementation. And I will not go, of course, into the details of the recovery plan, but that was based on these 4 principles that you see in front of you, which said basically that government has to be disciplined, it cannot spend as much as it wants. Of course, when the government reduces its involvement in the economy and expends less, I mean, you can get into tax reductions. And there was an issue that is coming back again. We called it from welfare to work, and it's basically cutting quite sharply, I should say, on all kind of allowances, and advance as much as we can the notion of market economy in terms of reforms in the market, structural reforms, and privatization processes. And again, I will say it many times, I'm not a politician, so I can allow myself to say that we did not invent anything. I mean, this is what Ireland did before us. This is what is done in Singapore. This is what is done in other emerging markets. It's clear economic policy that most of the people can agree to with some nuances. So to put these things with some data, and again, I try to be as clear as I can on this data without getting too much into technical definitions and terminology. Basically, when we talked about budget discipline, we said very, very clearly, these are our standards. We're going to reduce government expenditure. We put a cap on government expenditure not to raise it by more than 1% a year. Later, it went up to 1.7%. and reduce our deficit from what it was in 2003, 5.4, essentially to take it down over the years. And as you can see, I mean, we did quite nicely on that. By the way, the expectation in terms of deficit for 2008, I mean, this is the formal number, formal figure of the finance ministry. I expect it to be lower. I think that this year also will have quite a balanced budget like we had in 2007. In that regard, I mean, again, to give you the overall picture, which again tells something about what's going on here in Israel and what does it mean to deviate from the policies. You all know that most of the times, if not whenever we have a problem, we cannot resolve it just by ourselves. I mean, we usually go overseas, I mean, long distance overseas, to the American administration and ask for some kind of a support. This is exactly what we did in 2003. Just to remind you, at that time, Israel could not borrow in the international markets so as to finance its deficit. We went to the American administration, we asked for backing in the form of loan guarantees. And as you know, Americans usually when they give something, they want something in return, especially in this kind of a situation. If somebody provides guarantees to you, he wants you to behave nicely. And we made commitments, very, very specific commitments on what it means to behave nicely. We signed a short agreement in which we say government expenditures will not go up more than 1% a year. We will reduce our deficits gradually, and we gave numbers, 4% in 2004, 3% in 2005, and so on, until we reach 1%. We made other very, very clear commitments about what we're going to privatize, how we're going to reduce taxes, how we're going to cut on allowances. And I mention this because unlike, well, maybe I shouldn't say unlike, but outside of Israel, people have this kind of strange expectations that when you promise something, you intend to deliver. When you make a commitment, you will obey by that commitment. This is not always true in Israel, and from time to time we hear some statements. We can explain why we deviate from the policy. I mean, I want to remind all of you, I mean, now it's 5 years after we made the commitments, but those statements were made even at 2 years after we signed the agreement with the American administration. And I think that we have to understand that when you commit to something and you don't deliver, I mean, the markets or even other people will do something that will affect you negatively, not to say they will punish you. And this is something that is very important to remember. Now, I mentioned that again so as to see the picture, but one additional word about that. Every year, I mean, we formed some kind of a joint group with the American administration, and every year, literally, I had to fly over to the to Washington, or they come here. Usually, we flew over there, and with a spreadsheet, we went over all the commitments that we made. Either we got a check, nicely done, or there was a space there to provide explanations. And as time went by, I mean, we did better and better. So, when you do better, I mean, you stop reporting. But basically, we should not forget that when we even think about deviating from the policies. Getting back to the principles, so we said about budget discipline. The second thing, if you remember the sort of the hand movements of Bibi Netanyahu, I mean, I'm not even trying to do that because I will never meet the standards, but there was something about reducing government expenditure and, of course, reduces taxes, because if you spend less, you don't have to collect that much of revenues. And basically, we essentially enacted that as a law in 2005, but we started with some moves of reducing taxes. so as to be competitive in the global market, so as to provide, as I said before, right incentives for the private sector to have more income and to work more. And what you see in front of you is basically a schedule that takes corporate tax rates down from 36% in 2003 to 27% today, this year, and essentially 25% towards the end, at the end of the decade. There are some calls today to reduce it even further. I think that this is something that can be done. I can even tell you that at the time we wanted to take it down to 20. We wanted to have a schedule that takes it down to 20%, but there were some hesitations because we weren't sure that it's not too risky. By the same token, we reduce tax rates, and just to remind you, tax rates in 2000 and 2003 achieved a level of 64%. They will get to 44% at the highest bracket towards the end of the decade. It's not mentioned here, but we also reduced the VAT, Mas Erech Mosaf, from 18.5% or 18% that it was, now it's 15.5%. And I would expect that also to go even further. It's very costly to reduce VAT, but on the other hand, what's nice about it is that the finance minister can decide about it without getting the approval of the Knesset, whereas all other tax cuts, you have to get the approval of the Knesset, which is not that easy sometimes, certainly not these days. This is one of the things that you hear a lot about these days, and it relates to the question of allowance. And again, let me put it in perspective, and excuse me for talking with the numbers. We reached a point in 2002, as a matter of fact. This is the yellow line, in which 6.2% of what the economy was producing of GDP was given as allowances to people at the working age, people that can go out and work. This is something that we say is not sustainable. It cannot last for long. And basically what you see here, because we didn't have much of a choice, not because we are so brutal, we took the allowances down, that's what's called transfer payments. And what you see as a result of that is the white line that shows that participation rates went up quite nicely. More people try to look for jobs, to work so as to support their families. We are today talking about 56.2% of participation rates in developed countries like we want to be. They're talking about 80%. So there are problems here in measuring because not everything is, that works, not everybody that works indeed reports about it, but still and there is a way to go. Of course, when we did the right things, we also improved the unemployment. We're talking today about unemployment at, these are annual numbers, so I left it at 7.4%. Last numbers of the last quarter, the first quarter of 2008, talked about 6-something percentage of unemployment, which is very nice from where we were before. But I want to say something about the allowances because this is an issue that everybody talks about today. The allowances, some people claim, is a good measure so as to narrow the gaps in society, to make the poor people or the weak segments of society a little bit better off. In my view, and I think that it can be proved with what we have observed over the past 5 years, that indeed the right way to support the weak, people, and I'm always hesitant when I talk about weak or poor, but you understand what I mean, is really to provide them the supportive environment, the supportive infrastructure, so as to go to work rather than provide them with money. And indeed, in 2005, we presented to the then Prime Minister Sharon and then Finance Minister Olmert a very comprehensive plan to deal with the so-called gaps in the Israeli society. Indeed, we thought, I still think that this is something that has to be dealt with. Very, very important. And I can use all the cliches about how it can contribute and to the stability, the social stability, and so on and so forth. In simple words, I think it is the duty, the responsibility of the government, of all of us, to care and to deal with the problem, to care and to provide for the weaker people in our society. But the main question is how to do that. I mean, there's no dispute whatsoever that the government has to do something. And the question today, of course, because of the political instability, we see more and more pressure to raise the allowances, the transfer payments. I think that it will be a big mistake. It will take us back 5 years. It will risk some of the big achievements that we had in our economy in the past 5 years. I mean, we'll see that in a moment. All the figures are positive. And I think that instead of that, we can take the same amount of money and provide for people, provide an atmosphere, an environment in which kids will go to school at a very early age, stay there for long hours, get education, become productive, and that will also provide the right environment for the parents to join the workforce. Again, I mean, I think that it will be a big mistake to raise allowances these days. The fourth principle is, again, quite straightforward to most of us. It talks about market economy, and here again it reflects the fact that we didn't invent anything new. I mean, people knew before us that it's good for the government not to run business enterprises. It's good to go into privatization processes, but we made it much clearer with our statements and with our actions, saying that if we stick to our holdings in business enterprises that were owned by the government, we will all pay a price, because government, as simple as it sounds, government doesn't know, especially in Israel, how to run business enterprises, and the sooner we get out of those holdings, I mean, the better it is for all of us. I mean, there's sometimes notion about the Treasury received something, the Finance Ministry is going to bear the cost. I mean, at the end of the day, is a cost that all of us have to bear. So it's not the Finance Ministry that gets the money, it's not the Finance Ministry that spends the money, it's basically all of us who pay taxes here. You see the figures here. We started with El Al, the Israeli airline. We went on with the shipping company team, then 2 banks, and we finished with the refineries that are there. We basically did 2 things. I mean, we implemented reform. We split the one refinery into 2, one in Haifa and one in Ashdod, and sold both of them. And we enter also a series of reforms. Many people talk about the capital market, but we also changed the taxation framework paradigm, basically not just reducing taxes, but also equate over time all the tax rates, or have the same tax rates on all capital gains, but I will not get into that. The big reform in the pension funds, I mean, we're talking here all the day about the pension problem of Haifa University. I mean, there is a model already for resolving the problem, of course, with the involvement of the government. So what do we have as a result of that? Where do we stand today? And again, if I presented this these slides, I don't know, a year ago, I would be much more optimistic and enthusiastic about presenting those results, but still the results are quite good. We have sustainable growth. Well, essentially, I'll show you each one of them. So we have an economy that is growing. I mean, look at the change from a shrinking economy in 2001 and 2002, the turning point in 2003, and since then we have an economy that is growing at around 5% a year. This is very nice by all standards. Most European countries grow at not more than 2%. It's sustainable because it is generated by the private sector. It's not that the government spends more money and as a result of that, the economy is growing. And when the growth is generated by the private sector, it can last for long. And as a result of that, we talked before, we collect more taxes. And again, one thing that I can share with you, spending not just being the Director General, but also spending 3 months at the Revenue Service, collection of taxes is related almost only to the growth in the economy. It's not related to any other enforcement measures that the Revenue Service does from time to time. And what we see here is that since we had more and more collection of taxes, we were able to reduce our government debt from a very high level of more than our GDP down to around 80%. Just to give you an idea, Israel spends about 35 billion shekels. 35, today probably it's close to 30, but 35 at the time that I was there. 30 billion shekels every year just for interest payments. This is almost the defense budget. Okay, think about other things that could benefit from these amounts. And of course, if you want to pay less interest, one, you have to reduce your debt. Second, you have to behave nicely because people like to lend to somebody that would pay back rather than somebody that doesn't behave according to the standards. Here you see what happens as a result of the changes. Interest rates are going down. I remind you the times that we pay 14% and we couldn't find places to borrow. And this is one of the amazing things. I mean, I would not go too much into the comparison here, but there were times, I don't know exactly what is the picture today, in which the borrowing rate on bonds of the Israeli government and the US government were the same, okay? So the investors assumed, by the way they behave, that they trust the US government, or if you will, the Israeli government, much at the same level that they trust the American government, at least in terms of returning their money. Inflation is quite under control. As I told you, most of the indicators are positive, but less positive than they used to be. There are some concerns about inflation. They are related, in my view, to the fact that we are an absolutely open economy and we are affected by the changes in prices, not that much by the prices of oil, by the way, but more because of the prices of commodities. And you heard all these issues about being outside the target. The government target for inflation is 1 to 3%. For those of us who remember the 90s or even the 80s, this is quite a nice picture to observe. But what is amazing more than anything is this picture that you see now in front of you, and that talks about investments in Israel, foreign investment in Israel. We reached a peak, a record in the year 2000 that was mainly the result of the high tech. I remind you of a famous example that we all remember, Chromatis, that was bought for about $4 billion and a year later didn't exist anymore. So this account for the numbers in the year 2000. We came to the same level almost in 2005. In 2006, we had a record year. And this is a year, I just again remind you from time to time things that look from the remote past, but 2006 is a year in which we experience a war in the north. You here, I mean, we all here suffer from that war. 20% of the economy was shut down for about 2 months, and still we had the same level of growth, the same, I mean, you see a record here in terms of foreign investment, the same trend we experienced in 2007 and 2008. I mean, depends on what's going on in the markets, but still people, and that's very important to remember, people see Israel as a good place with all the criticism that we have on ourselves. Still, in the global market, people see Israel as an attractive place. And I again mention it because these are the things that we have to keep and maintain. I think that we are good and sophisticated and innovative people. We think that we provide the right structure, the right infrastructure, if you will, for investment. I mean, you can bring in your money and you can take it as soon as you brought it in. There are no restrictions on flow of funds in and out of Israel. There is still, I mean, although we are critical about it, but there's still a very clear enforcement system. There is a good communication system or infrastructure. All the things are in place. Maybe we're critical because we feel that there is a deterioration over time, but I invite any one of you to go over from the US. Certainly, I mean, if you go east, and people sometimes think that, you know, we are magicians here, that with all the problems that we face, these are the economic results. And if you want just a reflection of that, I mean, Israel is second just to the US in terms of companies traded in US exchanges, and almost any multinational has a center here in Israel, mostly in the high-tech industry, and many of them have their largest R&D centers outside of the US here in Israel, and the names appear before you. And recently, I mean, I don't have Google here, but even Google decided that they should have some of the centers here in Haifa, because maybe they think that the people in Haifa are smarter or whatever. But in any case, this is what we have. And I'm, excuse me for changing so rapidly to talking about the future, because at the end of the day, I mean, we are all interested more in the future. But let's just say one word. I think that we have indeed a very strong economy that is very important for introducing all kinds of reforms and changes. But it's quite fragile. We have to remember that. I mean, you don't need more than 1 or 2 wrong decisions so as to change all of it. And this is something that we all the time have to keep in mind. So looking forward, looking ahead, what are the things that we are concerned about? First of all, we see a global slowdown and maybe a recession, and of course, almost every person that I know has an idea about what will happen, and the ideas are not exactly the same, but certainly all the people are concerned about the future. There were times in which people were talking about a crisis in the financial markets and in the real markets, similar to the 29th crisis. I think that these days talking about that is a little bit strange, but there is almost a consensus that we experience a global slowdown. We in Israel have, I think, a problem with a very, very strong currency. I'll show you in a minute. I put here changes in the capital market because there were changes in the global market. I mean, it's very, very hard to borrow money now in the international markets. The emerging markets indeed suffer from lack of liquidity, from a situation in which 2 years ago everybody talked about excess liquidity. This also shows you about how quickly markets react to changes in the general atmosphere. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about the academic edge, but that will be at the end. This is something that, again, in my view, is sometimes frightening. The exchange rate in Israel has gone down over a period of about, I think, 2 years or 2.5 years by about 30%. Now, you don't have to be a sophisticated economist to think about a company that has a backlog of, say, $5 billion. It has to supply these projects. The amount in shekels of these projects go down by 30%, and all the expenditures, all the costs remain the same in shekel terms. And this is a problem that most of our exporting companies face these days. And indeed, we hear many people talk about it, sometimes shout about it, but we don't see immediately the effect of it. The headlines today talk about the second quarter in Israel as a quarter in which we'll see the effect of the rising index on one hand and the declining dollar on the other hand. But all I want to say is that a too strong shekel is not good for the state of Israel, nor to its economy. And we are going to see very, very negative implications of that. Not that I have a solution, not that I know better than the governor of the central bank or the people of the ministry what to do. I'm just observing a problem. I don't know what the solution is. Maybe this is the price or a price that we have to pay for having indeed an absolutely open market, but this is something that we have to keep in mind. The second thing is, people told me that I should say a word about the reforms in the capital market because otherwise, this is what people expect me to say, so I related that to the global capital markets. And what I want to say in that regard is that indeed we see a shrinkage of sources for funding all around the world. I can give you examples from Vietnam, from Singapore, from America, and from the UK and Europe. It's very, very hard, sometimes impossible, to borrow money. And the reason is, you all heard about the subprime and the other crisis, but large organizations decided they don't provide credit for some time, and they don't, as I said. When they make statements, it's clear, cut and clear, and they don't deviate from these statements. Still in Israel, we don't suffer from that much, and in my opinion, at least partially, it's because we have here a situation that is a bit different than what we observed in other markets, and that is that as a result of a series of reforms in the capital market, starting from the pension reform, the regulation, the structural reform that some of you heard the name Bahar reform, and other taxation reform, what we see in Israel is a situation in which more and more liquidity comes to the market and more money, especially institutional money, to use not that sophisticated terms. It's as simple as that. The pension funds and life insurance funds and all the long-term savings in Israel, as a result of our reforms, the accumulation of money there has to be invested today in financial instruments other than government bonds. Because until 2004, basically, the government provided those long-term savings with special bonds that provided or promised a very high yield. When we stopped that, because it's essentially a subsidy that you give from one segment of society to the other, the accumulation, those funds have to invest somewhere. Just to give you again an idea, we're talking about more than 1 billion shekels a month. More than 1 billion shekels a month is new money that is accumulated in all these long-term saving funds, pension, life insurance, and provident, kupot gemel. And this money has to be invested somewhere. And again, I didn't want to get into that issue too much, but one of the good thing about it is that we have competition to the banks in supplying credit. We saw that over the past 2 years, more and more bonds, corporate bonds, were issued by companies so as to finance their operation rather than just going to the banks. And as a result of that, of course, the banks have more resources, and we don't indeed feel. I mean, there are changes in the credit policy of the banks or of these institutional investors, but we do not see a major crisis in that area, which is quite good. Again, I'm not saying that it is exactly the same as it was a year ago, 2 years ago, definitely not. But still, we have enough liquidity in the market, and this is a good sign. Now, I talked about two areas of concern. The other one is academia. Indeed, what we observe over the years, what we feel that we observe, and sometimes we tend to overstate it, is that the government provides less and less funds to higher education. Some people say to all types of education, and not enough engineers, anyway, all the things that at the end say that we are at risk of losing our competitive edge in terms of being innovative. By the way, I mean, talking about branding and so on, sometimes it happens by the markets. I mean, nobody in any Israeli government before thought about branding Israel. And still, every place you go, you say Israel, and everybody thinks immediately about innovation. It's almost synonym to Israel. And I don't think that we are at risk of losing that comparative edge. This is not to say that we don't have to do much more in terms of providing funds to our education system from very early stage to the universities. This is something that has to be done. This is something that was about to be done because, again, let me just share with you a little bit of my experience working with government. I always say that sometimes we feel like maybe we know about a problem that the people in Jerusalem don't know about. So I can guarantee you all the problems that you are familiar with are known to the people in Jerusalem, the people at the government. All the problems. First of all, there are so many problems, so you have to decide which problem you want to deal with. But the first stage, an important stage, is that somebody decides that this is a problem that we have to deal with. And this is what happened with the higher education issue, the universities, and that I think happened about 2 years ago. I was still in the ministry at that time. There was a consensus at the Ministry of Finance that something had to be done. This was about the time, it was just, a little bit before the elections. I mean, I remember sitting with, she wasn't the education minister, but with Yuri Tamir and Ehud Olmert, who was the finance minister. And you could reach a consensus about what was the solution, or what should be the solution for the higher education system in Israel. And it was based, of course, on some kind of a compromise. I mean, the government will provide more funds to the universities, and we will increase tuition, will provide more fellowship and assistance to students that will repay their, it was called at the time the Australian, when Yuli Tamir first introduced that concept to me, she came with a presentation that was called the Australian solution. So there was even an experience of where that program was implemented successfully. In any case, this was the basis. I mean, and so the first step when you want to do something is that people agree about the existence of the problem. So we had that. The second thing is, of course, you form a committee. So even that was done. I mean, and most of you think that forming a committee is something that you decide in the morning, and in the evening you have a committee. It takes about 6 months to decide about the structure of this committee because everyone suspects the other that maybe he wants to, or she wants to put somebody in the committee. But anyway, even that was resolved. And it was resolved, and there is still, they don't work anymore. There is the Shochat committee. And the Shochat committee came with very clear recommendations. And that was about a year ago, or more than a year ago. And since then, we are waiting for that, or for those recommendations to be discussed in the government and then approved by the Knesset. And the problem here is that everybody knows the solution. I mean, we said before that we are aware of the problems, but the other problem in Israel is that everybody has a solution, and sometimes there are some differences between a solution of somebody to the solution of the other, and the point is of finding some kind of a consensus, and this is where we are stuck. And I think that this is bad news. I don't see how it's going to be resolved in the near future. And as I said before, there are two messages that I have here. One is that we are still investing a lot in promoting or advancing the innovative characteristic that we have. It's done mainly for defense purposes, then it is translated into civilian purposes. So in that respect, I mean, maintaining or keeping our comparative edge, this is not something that I worry about. And all those people that say that everything is moving into India or Singapore, it's not the same market. I mean, we're still considered all around the world as the most innovative people, and maybe it's related to our fight for survival. I don't want to get too much into that, but this is not the issue. The issue is that if we do not supply, I mean, if the government does not provide more and more funds to the higher education system, in my view, the students also have to participate in that move. But in any case, I think that we can find 60% of the issues on which we can agree, students, academics, government, everybody that is involved. And with that kind of a solution, it's a win-win situation because the universities will have more money, in my view, and I'm not saying that because I'm out of government, I said it before. I think that professors have to earn competitive salaries. For that, the universities have to have much more freedom in differentiating between salaries of professors, make it more competitive and adjust it to the market conditions. It is not that I think that we all have to be mathematicians, physicians, or economists. We have also to promote, by cross subsidies, other things that create knowledge, and they are very important. But the point is that as long as we do not advance with any solution, we are all stuck and we are all worse off. And this is a problem that, again, for that you need the right political structure, some would say the right leadership, and all the things that I mentioned before. And maybe sometimes I think that we have to increase the awareness of how bad the situation is, because as I said before, we are absolutely great in resolving problems when we get to a crisis situation. So I think that our economic situation is quite good. If it was 6 months ago, I would say it is great. This is the time to introduce reforms. The best thing to do is to have a crisis, think about reforms, get all the ideas, and then implement them when the market is doing better. I have some experience in that. I think that at least on the economic front, the governments, all governments of the past 5 years gained large amount of credibility, again on the economic front. I mean, just focusing on that, because we were able to implement a very clear, consistent economic policy. We said something and we did exactly what we would say, what we said before. There is a changing political atmosphere which is dangerous, and it's inside and outside of Israel. I mentioned again, I'm not a politician, but we cannot avoid observing what's going on around us, but not less importantly, what's going on inside Israel in terms of the political stability. We are great in fighting each other and sometimes not thinking about the whole implications of that. But at the end of the day, we all have to remember all the time. And again, I'm talking just about the economic impact. We are not alone in this world, and sometimes we throw all kind of statements that somebody in London or in Singapore or in New York that has to decide about Israel also read the papers of that morning, and not all the statements that are thrown are indeed absolutely true. Having said that, we have a very resilient economy. This is also a perception that exists everywhere. I remember trips that I made after the war, in the second war in Lebanon. And again, I'm talking just about the economic implications, talking in September of 2006 to people outside of Israel that invest in Israel or that trade in bonds of the government of Israel, and all of them said at the time, just stick to your policies. You think that the recovery will come sooner than you expect. And all of them were absolutely true. Israel has, I think, the right perception of a very resilient economy. I don't know about many places in the world. Especially if we talk about 2006, you have to imagine I come to talk to investment bankers that look at Israel and look over a period of a year. We have, where do you want to start? Resignation of Netanyahu, the disengagement, the two strokes of the prime minister, and political instability as a result of the creation of Kadima. Then we had the elections in the Palestinian Authority when Hamas won, much to the surprise of everybody. Then we had our elections, and then just to end the 12-month period, a small war in Lebanon. And this is a situation or the background with which you come, and you have to present the opportunities in Israel, how great Israel is. But these guys were telling me, Yossi, look at what happened. Netanyahu resigns, the market goes down by 5%, the next day it recovers. Next day, it's lo naim, as we said. But the market is up and back again, and this is what happened with all the things that, all the events that I mentioned before. In the middle of the war, the exchange rate was about 4.5, I think, shekels for the dollars. We were afraid of losing all our foreign currency. 2 months later, we experienced appreciation. The stock market was up, and in November we were out in the global markets borrowing money for Israel at lowest rate ever. In any case, so I think that this is also part of not deviating from our policies. I said we have a viable capital market, a little bit better than what we experience in other markets, essentially what's called the other emerging markets. And one last word about human resource. Essentially, I think that if I had to say one thing that we have to focus on, using the excellent economic situation that we have, is investment in education. And here again, I think that everyone that I know of is aware of the problem, agrees, can analyze the problem from start to end, what causes the problem. We have to pay the teachers more, we have to have more discipline. All the problem is known, most of the solutions are known, and the question is just about implementation. And again, what you need here, what we need here, is to think that not every one of us has to get exactly the solution that he or she thinks is the right solution. There should be some mechanism to take us or to move us forward, because again, even if you don't get exactly the solution that you think is the right solution, still you can get 60% of what you think is the right solution, and we will all be better off. So I can talk about many committees, many reforms that were proposed. I think that this is not the problem. We know the existence, we are aware of the problem. The reforms, the suggestions, the proposals were right. And again, there's no right solution in that regard, because nobody knows exactly the right solution. But I think that what we have to learn is indeed to give up a little bit, to move forward, even if the solution is not 100% what we need. There's no question in my mind that education, again, starting from a very low age up to the education at the university, is as crucial to our national security as defense. And I can tell you that all the time, spending money on defense is something that is approved like that, because there is a sense that it must be spent, because otherwise you see the immediate effect. And all that we have to do is to think the same way, and this is a national, I would say, project that we should all advance. Certainly in this place, we should call for promoting a big reform in education. It will do good for all of us in Israel. Thank you very much.